Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fanfiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
Prologue. It was a quirk of fate that brought him to this roof today. The man's lips stretched at his thought. It was actually 3 quirks which had brought him here today, and his own desire. Distant Eye allowed him to see the events, because sometimes he liked to check in on his nemesis. Here all allowed him to hear what was said, because while he used to be able to lip read, his eyes just weren't what they used to be. And Warp Gate, used by his servant Kurogiri, had actually provided the transport. He looked down at the boy, ignoring the sun on his back. It was somewhat nice to be out, but he wasn't here for personal enjoyment. He was here for the boy, for the spark he'd seen in the young eyes. He thanked fate not for the quirk that had made him look but for the timing. Heroes can be so cruel, he said softly. As expected, the boy flinched. He hadn't been aware anyone was present on the rooftop. Then watery green eyes looked up at him. The man frowned beneath his mask. How did he know the eyes were green? His vision wasn't that precise. He decided that they must be truly viridescent if he could perceive that with his damaged vision. He means well, but he often doesn't think of the consequences, the man said further, extending a few tendrils of power. From the earlier conversation he knew the boy was quirkless, he wasn't feeling for any quirk. No, this time he was extending his own, though. Again the man smiled. The turmoil inside the boy would make it easy. He couldn't force any change of heart, but his quirk let him know exactly what the boy was thinking. It let him know exactly what to say to get results. And right now, with the boy's mind in turmoil, now was the time to sow the seeds of change. You heard? The question was timid. I heard. There was no use denying it. Did you see? The man frowned. Had he seen? Oh, had he seen the state the supposed #1 hero was in? Yes, but I have known for a while now. I imagine it came as a shock to you? It was a gentle question, asked with the merest hint of power. Yes. The man could hear the way the boy swallowed. It sounded distinctly slimy, but that was normal. The boy had been crying. He means well, the man said, but he forgets the lessons of the past. He felt the boy move, tilting his head slightly to ask the question. He forgets that there is more to being a hero than just a quirk. Those green eyes blinked. It was almost incredulous. Then, do you? Again the question was timid and tentative. Again it was unclear, but the man had long been able to interpret such things. No, he said sincerely, but I do not know you, he added before the boy could collapse again. Having your dreams cut away was painful, especially for one so young. And I have never understood why people want to be heroes, he said, probing to see the boy's reaction. But heroes save people. The boy was quick to defend them. Heroes help people, and I want to help people. Ah, the man sighed. The most pure reason to want to be a hero. To his active quirks the boy almost shone with sincerity. It was nice to see such conviction. It would be lovely to see it harnessed to his cause. There are other ways to help people. The boy deflated. Yeah, a police officer, he said. There was a tiny edge to his voice. The man didn't smile, but inwardly he was pleased. He told you that? Yes. No imagination, the man sighed. And very pedestrian. There are other ways which would help far more people than simply being a hero or a police officer, though both are important. The boy frowned at him. To his quirks he could feel the confusion radiating from the boy's mind. What do you mean? Exactly that. A hero helps people, but they also are acclaimed for doing it. A policeman helps people, but again, they are acclaimed for it. Not as much as a hero, but they still do. Get the acclaim, yet they only save one person at a time, or at the most, a few. Yet there are others who save hundreds at time, maybe thousands, and they are overlooked. He could feel the boy thinking, but there was something else in the boy's mind. It was small, barely there, and with what he had seen of the child's nature, it probably wouldn't blossom, but maybe he could help it along. A hero uses their quirk, uses their power. The same with a policeman. They use their equipment, the man explained. But they are both controlled by others. The Hero Public Safety Bureau, the boy asked. The man nodded slightly, accepting the answer. But who controls them? The HPSB was a government group, run by the government, no matter which party was in power, for the benefit of the people. That's why heroes weren't allowed to be on their board. The government, the boy replied. Very good. It was odd to feel the flash of pleasure the boy felt at such faint praise. Or maybe not. The man couldn't see much, but he could determine a lot. Quirkless meant consequences after all. And who controls the police? He pressed. The government, the boy again answered. So you see? The man asked. The boy didn't get it. That was okay, it was one of those things many people didn't understand. They simply saw the flashiness of heroes. They didn't see the reality, they didn't see the rules and regulations that went with the costumes. They didn't see the cover-ups, but they weren't meant to see them. Don't you think the organization responsible for making sure there are heroes, and police, and medics, and rescue services and everything else is really the one saving people? It was not the strongest argument, but with the boy's current mental state, it would suffice. His trust in heroes had been ripped away. Really, if the plans he had tentatively forming for this boy worked in the way he hoped they would, he was going to have to thank his nemesis for this gift. Oh. The boy nodded. So it's about power. The boy connected the information to what he'd been told earlier. Yes. Heroes use their power to save people, but it is one at a time. The government uses the power it has to save everyone, so who do you think is more powerful? Who do you think saves the most people? Those who get the acclaim, or those who do the work? He paused, letting the boy think about that for a moment. So, if you really want to help people, which do you think you should be? The government. The answer was somewhat weak, but the reasoning was firm. It would become stronger over time. But I. The man frowned slightly. You? I don't know how to try that. The man laughed. Such a petty obstacle. I do, he replied. And I'm willing to help you, if you can help me. You can? I can, if you help me. He reached out with a particular quirk, reading the boy's mind. He couldn't force the decision, but he did know exactly what words to say. Then, you will be the first person I help. The boy declared. All for One smiled and held out his hand. Call me Sensei, Izuku Midoriya, and I will help you get everything you've ever wanted. The boy reached out his hand. The size difference was large. All for One didn't mind. The boy was his now. Chapter 1. Sensei picked up a new kid today. 14. Quirkless. I got a room ready for him and have already adjusted the bar's shipping manifest. Going to need more juice and milk now with a minor here, though Sensei says he won't be here for long. Sensei seemed to be expecting him. All for One doesn't have many tells, but when things go exactly the way he planned, there's a small smile on his face of satisfaction. He wants this kid for something. Something different than what he has planned for Tomura. The kid isn't fighting though, not screaming. He seems slightly wary and uncertain, and a bit sad but not afraid, so he's here because he wants to be. That's good, though I shouldn't be surprised. The kid's here, which means he's not some experiment, he's not meant to become a Numu. Tomura disintegrated 2 controllers when the kid came in. Sensei talked to him about something and that settled him. I hope the new kid isn't as high maintenance, a fop. Detective Naomi Tsukachi looked at the class. Their teacher had introduced him and they were somewhat quiet in his presence, and a few of them looked at the desk that was empty. He knew who that desk belonged to. Izuku Midoriya. Age 14, quirkless. The current theory was that he'd run away, but his mother insisted that he wouldn't. Except all parents did that. Even so, it was the main theory, though currently even the chief had to admit he didn't know why. Routine investigation into Midoriya's home life indicated no reason there. His mother was genuinely distraught at his disappearance. Tsukachi knew that was the case. She had no idea why he would run away, and she genuinely believed he hadn't. So that's why he was here, looking over the class. If it wasn't home life, then maybe there was a reason here Midoriya had run away. He wished he could talk to them one-to-one, then he'd be able to know if they were telling the truth, but there just wasn't enough time, and with no ransom note and no other information. As you are aware, your classmate has gone missing, he started. They were all aware of that. It is important for you to come forward if you know anything about that, he continued. These weren't primary school children. They were 14, almost 15, they knew what missing meant. He didn't have to take it quite as softly as he would have if they were younger. There was a snort from the back. Tsukachi felt his eyes shift to the speaker. He was blonde, and it looked as if the scowl was a permanent feature. What's Deku done now? The brat demanded. Naomasa resisted the urge to sigh. He assumed Deku was some kind of nickname, though with the way the kid said it, it didn't sound as if it was one of friendship. Izuku Midoriya has gone missing, he said, as if talking to a kid far younger than the one here, though his mind was analyzing the situation. There was nothing at home to cause Izuku to run, but maybe there was something there. He cast an eye at the teacher. The man didn't appear surprised at the attitude, so this was normal. The boy rolled his eyes. Attention grabber, he muttered. Do you know anything? Naomasa pressed. As if I'd know anything. Deku will show up in a few days. He just wants the attention. That may be, Tsukachi replied, but we are looking for him now. He cast his eyes over the rest of the glass. If any of you know anything, I ask you to tell me. Silence greeted his request. He figured he wasn't going to get anything this way. If not me, then tell your teacher who can pass the information on to me, he added. The kids just stared at him. He didn't expect anything, but he had to try. For Izuku's sake. A fop. Must admit to some mild surprise. The kid hasn't been that much trouble. He stayed inside. Sensei's orders, he said, and Sensei confirmed that. It's not hard to see why with the attention. Green hair, green eyes, and no quirk. The kid's wanted, and not in the way we are wanted. Missing person, Izuku Midoriya. Though it is interesting. If the kid's genuinely quirkless, he would make a good addition to the Numu program. It usually takes the addition of 2 to 3 quirks to break someone, then adding the rest is easy. And Sensei sculpts them to be somewhat recognizable. That's all part of the plan, obviously. But I wonder, if the process was applied to a quirkless individual, how many quirks would it take to break them? 1, because they aren't meant to have them, or many, because the lack of quirk means they can accept them all? Still, if the kid was going to be a Numu, he wouldn't be here, and that's all I need to know. I've amended the ordering schedule for the bar to account for an extra person living here full-time. Thankfully, the kid isn't picky about food. Izuku has played a few games with Tomura. Tomura won, and if the kid lost deliberately, he had the sense not to make it obvious. Mostly he's been reading his tablet. Even in the bar, the few times he's come out from his room. From what I've seen, he's reading political news, both for Japan and around the world. Some of the articles are old, but he's studying them anyway. I think Sensei is testing him on them. The kid asked for some notebooks. They are on the next order for the bar. Jiren looked surprised when it was phoned in. He usually has to get console controllers. Tomura has been good lately. I'm not sure if it's because he has someone who will actually play against him and genuinely try to win but can't, or something else. While Sensei did say something to Tomura about Izuku, I don't know what, and given the length of the conversation, not much could be explained up. Kurogyri? The mist bartender turned at the question. It was Izuku. He looked uncertain and was carefully looking around the bar to check how many people were there. Tomura was playing a game in the corner and some drunk was passed out at one of the tables, but that was everyone. It was a little early for anyone else to have come in. Do you need something, Izuku? Kurogyri asked. Dinner wasn't for a little while. The kid looked uncomfortable and uncertain. It wasn't an expression Kurogyri had seen on Izuku's face before. It was one he should have seen, but the kid was one who didn't look back once a decision was made. Could you arrange to get the paper in a week? The counter question wasn't one the bartender expected. The paper, he asked, his own confusion entering his tone. The bar had a standing order for supplies and the paper wasn't one of them. By the time they got it, it was out of date. Izuku nodded. The paper for a week from today, he said carefully. Kurogyri thought, wondering what was so special about that paper. He couldn't think of anything. Papers were still printed, but they had a very small circulation. They were mostly classifieds, births, deaths, and marriages, and the occasional governmental announcement. Most people got their news from the net. I can get it, the warp villain confirmed. Why do you want it? He couldn't help the curious question. Izuku smiled at him, relaxing slightly. The high school results, he chirped. Suddenly the desire for the paper made a lot more sense. While most high schools notified those who passed their entrance exams directly, there was a public listing of positions published in the paper for those curious. It was sort of like a government announcement. Did you apply? He asked. The boy gave a quick bark of laughter. No, he shook his head, his green curls moving slightly. His hair had gotten longer since he'd been here. I want to see who got into UA. Kurogyri blinked and then he reinterpreted the answer. Izuku didn't want to see who got into UA because most of the names would mean nothing to him. He was looking for a specific name. The request was somewhat comforting now that Kurogyri knew that. It meant Izuku hadn't just materialized. He did have a life before coming here, though it appeared to be a life he was willing and able to give up. I'll get the paper, the bartender assured him. Izuku smiled again. It was his genuine smile. The one that said he was pleased. Thank you, he said, and Kurogyri could tell the words just weren't a formulae. Izuku really did mean them. Kurogyri wasn't sure what this meant, but he would get the paper, and then he'd watch Izuku some more. It could be revealing, a fop. Sensei told me to amend the bar order again. High protein, high calcium, high calorie foods. Plus an assortment of multivitamins and some pretty hefty painkillers. Enough for one. It's not for him. If it was, the doctor would get them. Jiren will just have to cope. We are paying him, after all. The kid is spending at least an hour a day talking with Sensei. It's safe for him to be seen in the bar. The search for him was over pretty quick. No one said it, but the conclusion is simple. The poor quirkless boy went off to die somewhere, or just went. No great loss to society and the world moved on. Tomura is getting angsty about the time Sensei is spending with Izuku, but he's focusing on UA. With All Might teaching there, we have a chance to test the Numu. Tomura thinks it will be enough. I suspect it won't. All Might may be weakening as Sensei indicates, but he hasn't kept his position as number one hero because he is weak, and the tabloids and net do not have even a whisper of weakness. Even so, I am watching Tomura. Izuku is getting special treatment from Sensei, and that's going to cause issues up. Kurogyri looked at the poster. The corners were lifting and the wind was tugging at it, but the image and writing was legible. It was a black and white picture of a happy-looking teenager. The letters under it were large missing. There was a phone number under a basic description of Izuku. There was no mention that he was quirkless. He felt non-existent lips quirk. It was almost as if Izuku was a puppy. He was pretty sure if he peeled back the posters on the wall, he could find at least one for a missing pet. Though it was curious. This wasn't a good part of town, and it wasn't close to where Izuku used to live. How had the poster gotten here? Please? A voice came from the side. Kurojiri was surprised. Someone had snuck up on him. That usually didn't happen. He turned, standing tall before looking at who spoke. The voice had been tentative and not aggressive. It wasn't an attack, though the thugs around here knew better than to attack him. Woman stood there. She was simply dressed in a plain straight skirt, a shirt, and a cardigan. She looked like a housewife. She was slightly plump and her green eyes were eerily reminiscent of Izuku's. Ma'am? Kurojiri questioned. The woman sniffed and nodded. Please, have you seen him? She asked, her hand trembling as she pointed out the poster. Kurojiri noted the satchel she was carrying. The flap was open and he could see a sheaf of posters in there, along with some glue. Understanding filled him. This was Izuku's mother. Izuku looked very much like her. You shouldn't be here, ma'am. It's not safe, he told her. She shook her head. Please. Have you seen him? Her question was desperate. The mist villain looked back at the poster. I'm sorry, ma'am, I haven't, he lied to her. It was easy when you were mostly incomparable to lie. The woman sniffed, almost hiccuping. You shouldn't be here, Kurojiri repeated. Again, she shook her head. This was a bad area, and it wasn't like she was dressed richly. On clothes she wouldn't stand out, but she lacked a certain hardness that all natives to the area had, and that would mark her as an outsider. Let me walk you to the station, he pressed. But I... She wiped tears from her eyes with one hand as the other reached for her posters. This one is still here, Kurojiri said kindly. And shouldn't the police dash? There was a flare in her green eyes that Kurojiri recognized. Sometimes Izuku's would look like that. He knew better than to press, though now he knew where Izuku got some of his stubbornness from. I will make sure it remains here, he said instead. Thank you, the words were genuine. Kurojiri was surprised. She sniffed again. I just want my boy home, she said. Kurojiri nodded. She wasn't going to get her wish. Izuku was with the League now, but he could sympathize. He wouldn't act, of course, but he could understand her desire. In a world where they didn't exist, Izuku would have stayed with her. Let me walk you to the station, he repeated. Izuku had never spoken about his family. Kurojiri knew from the news reports about him going missing that he lived with his mother, and it was nice, in a way, that even after the police had given up, she hadn't. Izuku had a good mother. He should make sure she got home safely. The League owed her that much wafop. The high-protein, high-calorie, high-calcium food is for Izuku. It's the first time I've seen him show some reaction towards food, but he ate it and drank the shake. He's been taking the vitamins as well. He's been getting chubby as a result, but doesn't stop taking them. Sensei has told me to keep ordering them as well. That we will need more. I don't know what for. Beyond that, Tomura is both predictable and vicious. Vicious is a good trait to have in our line of work. Sensei never berates him for anything. Predictable is far less desirable, but perhaps I see it because of familiarity. Case in point, the information about UA's heroics 1A class interested him for a while, but he remained fixated on the bigger issue. Izuku and the attention Sensei is giving him. As with all things with Tomura, it came to a head quickly. Another game controller gone, and I swept today, but that was just the start. Tomura has yet to learn subtlety, has yet to learn diversion. I suppose that's an aspect of the way his quirk manifests. If anything does cause him problems, then all he has to do is touch it and it disappears. He deals with people in the same way. If they annoy him, then they die. Izuku hasn't done anything much to annoy him except for his interactions with Sensei. That's enough. It made Tomura jealous, and his reaction was both vicious and predictable. Predictable, he attacked Izuku. Vicious, he was going for the kill. Until Sensei spoke. I thought I was going to have to attempt to warp Izuku away, which is difficult when Tomura is gripping him, but Sensei intervened. Tomura still listens to him. Tomura dropped Izuku. The boy remained standing. It was a good effort, but he gripped at his throat, rubbing it gently. Sensei told Izuku to explain to Tomura. The boy nodded, but what I found interesting was the way he peered around the bar, checking who was there. There was no one. Just him, Tomura, and I. Izuku nodded. Then he explained. The gist of it was simple. Sensei is leaving everything to Tomura. Shigaraki already knew that. What Tomura, and I must admit I, have never thought about was that everything includes the mostly legitimate businesses. Sensei's empire is more than just the underworld. The underworld generates cash, but the legitimate businesses clean it and provide their own. They provide the cover for everything. They fund the bar. With Tomura's ability to disintegrate everything, including potential customers, income wasn't that great. Tomura would get everything, including Izuku. The boy didn't appear uncomfortable when he said that. Izuku's place was to control Sensei's legitimate businesses. He will run the business empire, while Tomura oversaw it all. It makes sense. Tomura doesn't have a head for business. Though Tomura does have a head for reality. The kid is too young. He's 14. No one is going to accept him as a business leader. Sensei just laughed. He had thought of that. He announced that he'd start tonight. Izuku looked surprised but nodded. Tomura doesn't know what is going on. Neither do I. Next day. Know what is happening now. It takes one type of person to become a hero. It takes another to become a villain. And it takes something else again to be a linchpin of change. Sensei will give Tomura everything, but Izuku is the linchpin upon which it all rests. Was ordered to transport Izuku to Sensei last night. Then he ordered me to stay. The room was bland. There were no cupboards, no windows, shelves, or tables in there. There was only one chair, a dentist's chair in the middle of the room. It had straps on it. Thick, reinforced mesh straps. Izuku put himself in the chair without hesitation. Sensei ordered me to make sure the fastenings were secure. Izuku smiled at me. Then Sensei came over to Izuku. He said nothing before he raised his hand and placed it over Izuku's forehead. Sensei is a large man. Izuku is a small boy. His hand completely covered his face. I'd seen that gesture before. It was the one Sensei used when he was going to take a quirk. Except Izuku didn't have a quirk. I wondered for a moment if he was going to get one, but that didn't explain the restraints. Then I knew what they were for. Izuku stiffened. I think he would have screamed, but his throat was as stiff as his body. The restraints were pulled tight. He strained against them. He's quirkless, so he couldn't break them, but I could see them digging into his pudgy flesh, biting into the fat that had accumulated with the diet he'd been eating lately. It stained the skin around them red. Not with blood, they didn't cut him, but the strain made the skin red and angry. Then as I watched, Izuku seemed to change. His limbs, which had been carrying fat, grew longer. The fat disappeared as his body altered. Tears ran out from under Sensei's hand and I could hear Izuku gasping for air. Sensei explained. He reminded me that everyone focuses on the fact that he can take quirks and that he can give them. But mixed up in that focus is the view that he only takes strong combat quirks. Had an inkling then. It was the feeling that you get when you know the future, and you know what is about to be said even if you've never thought about it before. Sensei was known for taking combat quirks, but Sensei had been alive for centuries. he has taken other quirks in that time. He pulled his hand away from Izuku. I looked at the boy. His eyes were wide. The green orbs were unfocused and he was gasping for air. His face was different. Older. It was the same as his limbs. He was older now. Only a few years, Sensei assured me. About 16, Izuku said later before he confirmed he'd be there next week, if all went well. And that was when I knew the plan. Tomura was right. Izuku was too young to run the commercial empire Sensei controlled. But by the time Sensei was finished, he wouldn't be. Chapter 2. Kurogiri wasn't the only one to look around when he materialized the group in one of UA's training facilities. From the information they had gathered from the schedule, this one was under the Hero 13's control and was called the Unforeseen Simulation Joint. The descriptions he'd read said that it was covered in different types of terrain, and as he looked around he could see it was true. He could also see the teachers. 13 and Eraserhead, he voiced his thoughts. The teacher's schedule we received the other day said All Might was also supposed to be here. Izuku gave him a look. The man-boy was standing next to the Numu and Kurogiri could see the way he was also looking around excitedly. He wore a mask so as to avoid any possibility of identification. His clothes were simple, like Tomura's, though slightly more formal in that his black shirt was buttoned up, and his pants were pressed. His shoes were plain black leather. The only thing marking him out as special was that he hadn't moved with the others. "Where is he?" Tomura muttered. "I went through the trouble of bringing this whole crowd, too." Kurogiri remained silent. He'd brought the crowd. He didn't miss the way Izuku quirked his head slightly and could imagine the smile on the man-boy's face. He'd picked up on Tomura's statement as well. All Might, the symbol of peace. "I can't believe he's not here," Tomura said, raising his arms. He was dressed plainly in a black pullover and black pants. Today, the hands that were normally attached to his body were concentrated on his upper frame and face. He didn't have a mask because he didn't need one. The hand did it all. Tomura lowered his arms, as if realizing dramatic gestures here would do nothing. "I wonder if he'll come if we kill some kids." "Some will probably die if we carry on with the plan anyway," Izuku murmured. The statement seemed to reassure Tomura as Eraserhead jumped down the steps. Kurogiri watched as the battle went as expected. The so-called villains Tomura had gathered for this were nothing more than cannon fodder. Their job was to provide distraction. The real force was the Numu that was still standing silently where it had emerged from his warp. He watched Eraserhead. He couldn't actually see the man's eyes, but he could feel when the pro-hero's gaze was no longer on him. He took the opportunity to continue the plan as Izuku said and warped away. There was no need to tell Izuku to be careful. The man-boy would be. He was just an observer this time. The mist villain materialized near the door. He looked down at the group there. The children were running towards him, but he was now between them and the door. One of the potential flaws in the plan was if someone got away. He would prevent that. "I won't let you," Kurogiri muttered, before shifting his gaze somewhat. He kept his form tall, so that he looked down at them. "It's nice to meet you. We are the League of Villains." It was important to get that said, or who knew what name the heroes would come up with for them. Hanzi and his sidekicks? No thanks. There was at least some dignity in the League's name. The children skidded to a halt, looking up at him. 13 at least had the presence of mind to move to the front of the group. After all, he was the closest villain now. "It may be presumptuous of us, but we have invited ourselves into the home of the heroes, UA High School, in order to have All Might, the symbol of peace, take his last breath." Except All Might wasn't here. Kurogiri didn't need to remind himself of that, but again it was best that they understood what the mission was, and how little they could do to stop it. "I believe All Might should have been here." Has there been some kind of change? There had to have been. Well, that is neither here nor there. This is the part 1 am to play. And playing his part in the plan, even without All Might's presence, would cement the League's reputation and allow them to salvage something from this day. The two children moving to attack him was a surprise. The explosion slightly more so. And, did they really go for his neck guard? They had. Oh dear, that was close. That's right, Kurogiri said to himself. Even if you are children, you are excellent golden eggs. These were UA's heroic course children, and UA was the best hero school in Japan. Even the children would be good. He was better. No. Move way, you two. The mist villain looked down at them. 13 had one arm out. A smile formed unseen on Kurogiri's face. The two children had gotten in the way of their teacher. Not that an attack from 13 was that dangerous. It would be to Izuku, but not to him. My job is to scatter you all and torture you to death, Kurogiri announced, streaming forward. Group transportation required him to create a larger portal, and in this case, they would be several portals. With all the villains he had transported here today, finding a gathering point for them where he could expand large enough to create the original portal had been a bit of a problem, until they just took over one of the empty lots in the area. If any of this lot survived today, they may be worthy of learning about the bar. He twitched slightly, feeling a couple pass through his side, but Kurogiri couldn't focus on that as he created multiple portals and dragged them over the children. There was an odd feeling with one. He knew she was there because of the gloves, but it was odd to transport an invisible person. And ugh, they felt terrible within him. It was with some relief that Kurogiri released them all, scattering the children around the USJ facility. The rest of the villains would deal with them now. He spared a glance down the stairs towards Tomura, but he was still standing with the Numu and Izuku. That was in hand. Instead, those who had remained here were talking. 13 was here, as well as someone dressed in white armor. They were discussing their plan? Kurogiri blinked. Seriously? It was obviously beyond time to end this. Even if you have no other choice, are there really idiots who talk about their plans in front of the enemy? He drove forward. 13 moved to meet him. We did it because it doesn't matter if we're found out, the pro-hero cried, uncapping her the tip of her right forefinger glove. There was a tug from it. Kurogiri expanded, but he could feel the wisps of mist he used to define his gates being pulled in. Black hole, the pro-hero cried. It was an amateur move to cry out the name of an attack. He thought a pro would be beyond that, though maybe All Might was a bad influence? The number one hero cried out the names of his attacks all the time. American cities. Bah! There was no difference between those attacks. They were all punches. Black hole, Kurogiri said conversationally. He saw how the pro was being careful to remain in front of the children. It sucks up everything and turns it all to dust. I see. That is an astounding quirk. He ignored the mist that was being ripped from his body as he had the irreverent thought that it would be perfect for cleaning up after Tomura. No more dust in the bar. 13's quirk was powerful, but the pro-hero didn't know how to fully use it, and it was time to demonstrate. However, 13, you are a hero who works to rescue people from disasters. Which was not the type of hero the League was really after, but a pro was a pro, and now was not the time to differentiate. As expected, your battle experience is less than half of that of a normal hero. He'd planned this from the start, so it was easy to open a warp gate behind 13. The effect was instantaneous. A warp gate? There was panic in the pro-hero's voice. You turned yourself to dust, Kurogiri mocked as the back half of 13's suit disintegrated. He'd seen a lot of things disintegrate thanks to Tomura. This wasn't as fine as Tomura's power, but the black hole was effective. The pull from the black hole vanished as 13 fell forward. He got me, Kurogiri heard the pro say. Obviously not completely if the pro was still capable of speech, but she would not be continuing to fight. The children were dismayed. It was nice to see their shock, it was nice to savor their despair. Though at least one was intelligent. Kurojiri heard the footsteps and turned. The one in white armor. One of the children who was not scattered, he thought. He had felt a few escape his earlier dome. We're only waiting for All Might. If the other teachers are called here, it will be hard for us, Kurojiri knew that. It would be a disaster if they lost either Tomura or Izuku. Probably Izuku. That would reveal far too much of Sensei's plans because the heroes would find out who he was. And from there, Izuku wouldn't tell them, but they would know. With his new age, it was impossible to hide the fact that something larger was going on. They would be suspicious. He couldn't allow that. He opened a gate in front of the running child. It was a good plan, but he couldn't allow it. Arg! Kurojiri cried out as something engulfed him. The sensation wasn't pleasant as things wrapped around him, forcing his form into a smaller space. You impertinent! I will not allow you to go outside. He kept his attention on the runner. This wasn't enough to stop him. You impudent, 4 eyes! Be gone! The child was almost at the gate. It would transport him a long way. Except, why was the world dropping away? My body! Oh no! The unfamiliar sensation blanked out his gate. That didn't matter, he could open another, he just needed to see the running boy and it would be done. Just a second. Irk! The world spun. Kurojiri felt a jerk at his neck and the USJ spun around him. He tried to regain stability, but the world kept spinning. One thing was clear. The door. It was open. He's going to call for support. It's game over. Ugh, now he was using Tomura's terms, but it was true. This mission was effectively over. But, if he went outside then? UA's security was impressive. He would be detected and that would be an even faster way to lose. They had some time now. Limited, but some. Kurojiri left the children as he warped himself back to Izuku and Tomura. Izuku looked up at him briefly but was not surprised at his presence. Kurojiri could see that Tomura had been fighting. Pro Hero Eraserhead was very much down, but he had to report. Tomura Shigaraki. Tomura turned to him. Kurojiri, did you kill 13? I put 13 out of action, Kurojiri confirmed. But there were students that I was unable to disperse and one of them has run away. Izuku displayed no reaction. He wasn't invested in this attack. Tomura was. He reached up and scratched at his neck. Kurojiri could tell that he was frustrated. He was as well. It should have been. Simple thing to stop the children, but these were the best of the future heroes. He shouldn't have underestimated them. Huh? The word was practically a snarl. You. If you weren't a warp gate, I would have crushed you into pieces. Tomura raged. It was the same rage he showed when whatever game he was playing defeated him. Then he calmed. One of the good things about Tomura was that while he was quick to anger, he was equally quick to release that anger. The resentment he felt from it would fester, but he would not lash out unless it was in the moment. We can't win against dozens of pros. It's game over. Man, it's game over this time. Let's go home. Izuku made a small noise. Kurojiri was slightly surprised as the manboy's mask turned towards them. He held out one hand pointing at the Numu who was still restraining Eraserhead. Then he pointed to the water. There were 2 students standing there. Their fear was palatable. The boy looked close to crying. Tomura chuckled, obviously pleased with the suggestion. Oh yeah, before we leave, let's smash some of his pride as the symbol of peace. Kurojiri knew Tomura could be quick when the boy wanted. He was reminded of that fact now. One moment he was standing with them, the next, his outstretched hand was a millimeter from the students' faces. They hadn't moved. They hadn't even cried out, so why had? Darn it! You really are cool, Eraserhead. Ah, that explained it. Kurogiri glanced towards the beaten pro hero. The red gleam in his eye was unmistakable. He'd stopped Tomura. Even beaten and bloody, the man was a pro, after all. But he couldn't keep his eyes open forever. The crash from the far end distracted them all. The girl student had the presence of mind to jump back. The boy didn't. Tomura's hand touched his face. All 5 fingers. The Numu ground Eraserhead down further. The boy screamed. Tomura liked to say that he had no control over his quirk. That wasn't quite true. It was true that he couldn't turn it off, but he could, partially at least, control its intensity. A glance at Eraserhead's elbow indicated Tomura had let his quirk be slow then. The damage was superficial. Painful but superficial, mostly extending to the pro hero's skin. This time, his touch wasn't. The boy's face just disappeared, allowing Tomura's grip to go tighter, to dig into his eyes. His scream became wet and his tongue distended before it disappeared. Balls were popping off the back of his head in a torrent, but it did nothing. His eyes bulged and cracked, and then Numa was in front of Tomura, shielding him, and All Might held the boy, who was now gasping for air. His face was gone, leaving a bloody pulp where it used to be. He smeared blood onto All Might's shirt. Tomura chuckled, stepping around Numu. Oh, we're getting a continue. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the way Izuku was glaring at the number 1 hero. Kurogiri looked at the man-boy. It wasn't obvious because of the mask, but there was a distinct glint in Izuku's eye. He resisted the urge to sigh. More history. There was always more history, but that was to be expected. Sensei wouldn't have chosen Midoriya if there wasn't a reason. He missed what All Might said. I've been waiting, hero, you trash of society, Tomura announced, bringing Kurogiri's attention back to him. It was dangerous otherwise. All Might couldn't be underestimated, though the warp villain cast his eyes around. He's alone, Izuku whispered to him, breaking protocol slightly. He wasn't meant to speak if there was a chance anyone could overhear him, but the words were soft. Kurogiri overlooked that. So All Might had come ahead of the others. How noble, how convenient, for them. There was another burst of air. Tomura cried out, and again Numu was protecting him. Kurogiri could see that Pro Hero Eraserhead was now in All Might's arms and being delivered to a group of students. Ah, that made sense. Except. It's no good. It's no good. Tomura's words were a litany. He was shaking. One of his hands was gone. Kurogiri braced. That was never good, except before Shigaraki could explode, Izuku offered him the hand. For a moment the mist villain thought Tomura would attack Izuku. No one touched Tomura's hands but him. The other villain didn't seem to notice. Instead he took the hand back, cradling it gently. It's no good, he whispered again, looking down at the hand. I'm sorry, father, Tomura added as he lifted the hand to his face, fitting it over his features. Kurogiri breathed a small sigh of relief. There wasn't going to be an explosion this time. They couldn't afford it. All Might had hit Tomura as he was saving Eraserhead. Tomura appeared to refocus. It's the violence of a government official, he muttered. He's fast, as expected. I can't follow him with my eyes, but he's not as fast as I thought he'd be. I guess it's true, after all, that he's getting weaker. That is what Sensei had said, though it didn't appear as if All Might was weakened at all. Still, it wasn't their job to fight him. That was why Numa was here. The black creature attacked. Tomura chuckled. It was easy to see why. All Might was shocked that Numa had withstood his punch. It was understandable. The number 1 hero wasn't known for being weak, and even in villain society there were very few who could stand against him, even temporarily. It doesn't work because of shock absorption, Tomura told the hero. In order to damage Numu, it would be most effective to slowly gouge out his flesh. Whether he'd let you do that or not is a different issue though. Of course it was. Numa was made to fight All Might, and while by many measures the hulking creation was stupid, when it came to fighting, it wasn't. It knew what to do, and taking damage unnecessarily was one thing it would avoid. You can make a warp gate that is a circle, can't you? Izuku whispered to him. Kurogiri didn't look at the manboy. I can, he confirmed. All Might will use a brainbuster, suplex or piledriver, Izuku continued whispering. When he does. Kurogiri nodded. He knew those moves. When All Might did that, if he opened a warp gate, the Numu would have the upper hand. The Numu charged. All Might met his charge. All Might was more than just a hero thug. He thought about his punches. He thought about his moves. He couldn't have been the number one for so long if he didn't. But that was his downfall. Izuku was right about his moveset. Kurogiri saw the moment All Might took a grip on Numu and prepared to drop the creation backwards. Hey hey! Tomura exclaimed. The move wouldn't kill Numu, but it would stun the creation for a moment. The warp gate opened. Numu didn't really understand what happened, but he knew enough to take advantage of the situation. Claw-like fingers dug into All Might's left side. The hero didn't cry out, but it was a close thing. Blood seeped around Numu's fingers. Shigaraki appreciated the sight. Were you trying to keep him from moving by sticking him deep into the concrete? You won't be able to stop him like that, because Numu is as strong as you are. He crowed happily. This is good, Kurogiri. This is an unexpected opportunity. Kurogiri. The mist villain knew what the order meant. This was going to be messy. I do not want blood and guts overflowing within me, but I would be happy to take in someone as great as you. You are too fast to see with human eye. Restraining you is Numu's job, and then, when your body is halfway in, to close the gate and tear you apart is my job. Not really, but that was the way these things happened. He was about to close the gate when the children attacked. Kurogiri recognized some of them. 2 of them had attacked him earlier. The explosive child gripped his neck protector while the other one. This was not good. The other one Kurogiri recognized had his hand at Izuku's throat. The manboy wasn't moving and his mask was still in place. His throat was exposed. That was something. At least that other child hadn't actually gripped him. That could be troublesome. Tomura was the only one unguarded, and the Numu. Its arm and leg was frozen. All Might leapt free of its grip. Numu was quick to move out from the warp gate, but it cost an arm and leg. They regrew quickly. They were at an impasse, but it was one that suited the heroes. There were no doubt other pro-heroes already on the way. Tomura knew that, and he knew that while Kurogiri was trapped they couldn't escape. Kurogiri just hoped the boy remembered Izuku. Sensei would be upset if they lost him today. Numu, Izuku snapped quickly. His eyes seemed to be fixed on the black creature, but from Kurogiri's angle, he could see that Izuku was actually looking at the child holding him. Was there something there? Shut up, the child at Izuku's throat growled. But the word was enough. Tomura recognized the opportunity. He flicked one hand. The Numu knew what to do. The mist villain barely saw the movement, but he felt the child's grip release. He expected to see the child as a splatter on the floor. He wasn't. Instead, All Might was putting him down, along with the other one. Even if Tomura didn't mean it, Numu had forced All Might to see to the children first, meaning Izuku was free to move around. Kurogiri wasted no time as he rose and stood near Izuku with Tomura before them. He protected the child, huh? Tomura asked rhetorically. Of course, All Might protected the child. The number 1 hero took a few deep breaths. Numu hadn't attacked him, but the damage was obvious. Do you not know how to hold back? All Might asked, still holding his position. Tomura stepped up to them. It was to rescue my companions, he said. I had no choice. Violence for the sake of others makes it admirable. Isn't that right, hero? You know what, All Might? I'm angry. I'm angry that this world categorizes the same violent acts as heroic or villainous, deciding what's good and what's bad. Symbol of peace? Ha! You're just a device to repress violence. Violence only breeds violence. The world will know this once we kill you. Izuku glanced at Tomura. Unless the boy was ranting at one of his games, that was actually a long spiel from him, and no doubt All Might would have something to say, but they didn't have time. Thankfully Tomura recognized that fact. Numu, Kirojiri, get him. I'll deal with the children. Now let's clear this and go home. Numu charged, as did Tomura. The children were more aware now and ran. Kirojiri didn't move from Izuku's side. They were in the endgame. If they got separated now there would be no chance to regroup. Tomura never got the chance to attack the children. The shockwave from Numu and All Might knocked him off his feet, but he was quick to recover. Sensei had trained him that well. Darn. Hey, you talked about his shock absorption yourself earlier, didn't you? He addressed the number one hero. Yes, I did. All Might admitted, exchanging more blows with Numu. The wind pushed everyone back. Kirojiri hooked one hand around Izuku's upper arm as he was blown back towards Tomura. I can't get near him, he told the hand-covered villain. If your quirk isn't shock nullification but shock absorption, then there's a limit to it, right? Tomura hissed. Kirojiri knew what that meant, as did Izuku. The number one hero was correct in his assessment. Though so far Numu was holding on and the black creature was not weak. Shock absorption wasn't his only quirk. But Kirojiri watched as the landscape disintegrated under the force of the blows. It wasn't going to be enough. He could feel that, he could see it in the way Numu moved, the way the head bent backwards. All Might was still too strong, or was prepared to push himself too far. Kirojiri's eyes narrowed as he watched the fight. The signs were there. They were subtle, you had to look for them, but as All Might landed his final blow, literally driving Numu through the outside dome of the USJ, Kirojiri knew that while they had lost this time, it was only this time. That didn't mean it wasn't scary when the number one hero turned towards them. Izuku seemed not to be affected. He still glared at the pro-hero. Hey, what's going on? Tomura was muttering. He's not any weaker at all? Did that guy lie to me? He reached up and scratched at his neck. If he didn't stop soon, he'd be bleeding. Sensei hadn't lied, could Tomura not see that? Tomura Shigaraki, please calm yourself, Kirojiri urged. Usually Tomura would already have been calm. It was a measure of his anger that it was lingering. Look carefully. You can see that he was definitely weakened from the damage from Numu's attacks. The mist villain weighed up the time. They might still have time before the others arrived. It was probably safer to retreat, but in this condition, Tomura wouldn't accept that. The children appear to be frozen in fear. We still have underlings who can be used. There are likely only a few minutes before reinforcements come, but if you and I work together, we still have a chance of killing him. All Might was weakened. They could do it. Maybe. To live with Tomura, they had to try. Under his mask Izuku gave him a look. It told the mist villain that he didn't think it was a good idea, but Kirojiri shook his head slightly. This had to be done. Yeah, that's right. We have no choice but to do it. I mean, we have the last boss right in front of our eyes. Tomura bent forward slightly, his eyes glaring at All Might from between the fingers of the hand. He stretched out one of his arms, reaching towards All Might as he dug in his shoe to the ground. Tomura's yelp was not expected. He pulled back his hand quickly. Kirojiri saw the wound. A gunshot. He knew what that meant. Tomura huffed. Ah man, they're here. It's game over now. Shall we go home and try again later, Kurogi Dash? It was odd to see Tomura fall, but he did. The cause was easy to see. He was bleeding from each arm and leg. That meant pro-hero snipe. There was no point in trying to see him. Kurogiri expanded himself, spreading around Tomura and Izuku, who had the sense to move closer. There was a gust of air from the side. 13. Izuku's exclamation wasn't needed. This wasn't good. Kurogiri gritted his teeth and kept opening the gate. Tomura glared. I may have failed this time, but I will kill you next time, symbol of peace, All Might. The gate closed around him, and they disappeared. Kurogiri was happy to see the familiar inside of the bar. It was the first place he could think to warp them to. Tomura fell to the ground, bleeding. Izuku looked at Sensei's TV. It said voice only, but that meant Sensei was there. He looked at it, taking off his mask. I understand, Izuku said. Kurogiri looked at the man-boy. There was a gleam in his eyes, a look that said he'd do whatever it took. He couldn't help the smile that formed, even as Tomura bled. They may not have killed All Might, but maybe they'd gain something else. Izuku didn't pause for long. He moved to the bar and reached over it to where there was a first aid kit. Kurogiri looked down at Tomura, who was now staring up at the TV. They'd get through this.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.